Such a time, Mr. Speaker, I need to be cautious of the Article 125 of the Constitution, which requires us as a House that in matters such as this, Mr. Speaker, we must behave like judges, because under Article 125 of the Constitution, Mr. Speaker, we sit as a High Court, Mr. Speaker. And in the words of Socrates, Mr. Speaker, a judge is required to listen courteously, to answer wisely, to consider soberly, and definitely to decide impartially, Mr. Speaker. There were 11 charges, Mr. Speaker, that were put before us, Mr. Speaker, and they were put to us in the context of Constitution 2010, Mr. Speaker. The Constitution 2010, Mr. Speaker, came in the backdrop of two very important historic moments in this country, Mr. Speaker, that I must reflect on, Mr. Speaker. Number one, Mr. Speaker, is the section paper number 10 of 1965, Mr. Speaker. That section paper number 10, Mr. Speaker, divided this country into those who are important and those who are not important. The language that was used then, Mr. Speaker, was the idea of northern frontier district, Mr. Speaker, that then discriminated upon some communities, Mr. Speaker, against others, Mr. Speaker. Number two, Mr. Speaker, in 2007, Mr. Speaker, this country was divided on the basis of ethnicity, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, I rise to support this motion if my grounds, Mr. Speaker, after listening courteously and considering soberly, Mr. Speaker, are more than half of the charges, Mr. Speaker. And I find that ground 1, 5, and 6 on the utterances of the Deputy President, Mr. Speaker, violate Article 91 of the Constitution and Article 232 of the Constitution. We cannot have political parties, Mr. Speaker, that are founded on the basis of ethnicity and dividing national resources on the basis of ethnicity, Mr. Speaker. Number two, Mr. Speaker, that would make the ground number 4, which actually also happened to be reason number 4 for why the Deputy President must leave office, Mr. Speaker, the violation of Article 160 of the Constitution, Mr. Speaker, of undermining the judiciary, Mr. Speaker. There was an imminent threat to the judges there, Mr. Speaker. You realize that in my judgment, Mr. Speaker, I excuse ground number 8 on the basis of the fact that there was no proof that there was a petition that was not filed, Mr. Speaker. But on the threat, Mr. Speaker, I think that the Deputy President stands impeached, Mr. Speaker. Ground number 9, Mr. Speaker, on NIS, Mr. Speaker. We know that this country has faced serious terror attacks, Mr. Speaker. And the moment the Deputy President, Mr. Speaker, showcases the secrecy of deficiency in our security infrastructure, Mr. Speaker, and you know that under Article 240, he has platforms to be able to express himself, Mr. Speaker, it is a violation of the Constitution, Mr. Speaker. Lastly, on ground number 11, Mr. Speaker, on bullying KEMSA official, Mr. Speaker, it has been proven here beyond reasonable doubt, Mr. Speaker, that the Deputy President is not a member of the company that was listed. He's not an employee of that company, Mr. Speaker, yet he goes ahead and makes calls on behalf of that company, Mr. Speaker. That is impeachable. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, I must call the Council of the Deputy President to order, Mr. Speaker, especially Council Paul Muite, Mr. Speaker, for actually practicing law in deceit, Mr. Speaker. You cannot say that at the level of the Deputy President, Mr. Speaker, he was okay in this house the entire time, and then when asked, you are saying you cannot be able to account for his whereabouts, and you know that the Deputy President, Mr. Speaker, also must be able to be taken care of by the DG of Health, Mr. Speaker, who could have given us a document to be able to substantiate whether the Deputy President is sick, Mr. Speaker. While I say sorry to the Deputy President, Mr. Speaker, I think this kind of deceit should also be tantamount to further impeachment, Mr. Speaker. I do, therefore, say that on ground 2, 3, 7, 8, and 10, they are not substantiated. But on ground 1, 5, 6, 4, 9, and 11, Mr. Speaker, this is a fight against tribalism that is done by one individual that then we must...
Senator Osotsi, unfortunately, you only have 4 minutes because we terminate at exactly 10:30.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'll be so quick. Mr. Speaker, when the Deputy President was here, I remembered the saying of a famous philosopher, 19th century, Lord Acton, who said, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Mr. Speaker, a few of us here served with the Deputy President in the National Assembly. And when we were there in the National Assembly, the Deputy President was a very humble man, very simple, very social, and was rare to talk. But listening to the judges and having seen what has been happening around, this is not the same man. This is a different man. So indeed, I want to agree with this philosopher that power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And this is, it may affect all of us here. So there is something we need to learn from what has happened today. Mr. Speaker, I also want to congratulate the members here for their decency and maturity in conducting a fair trial. Mr. Speaker, it is not true that the Deputy President has not been given a hearing. We had to adjourn this House for 2 hours to wait for the witness to come. He didn't come. And Mr. Speaker, you know that the tradition of this House, that sometimes we receive written submissions. We do that in our committees. We do that in public participation. So the members who are saying that he was not given a fair hearing is that is not true, because this House tried as much as possible to get the Deputy President to come. Mr. Speaker, a lot has been said about various laws and articles of the Constitution that the Deputy President has violated. But one important article of the Constitution that runs through all the charges, Mr. Speaker, is Article 131 of the Constitution, which read together with Article 147, clearly says that the Deputy President is a symbol of national unity. That is not the case, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if you go ahead, Article 131(2) says that the Deputy President, by dint of Article 147, should respect and uphold and safeguard the Constitution. That is not the case. The Deputy President should promote and enhance the unity of the nation. That is not the case. The Deputy President should promote respect for diversity of the people and communities in Kenya. Mr. Speaker, that is not the case. So if there is any piece of law that is going to send the Deputy President home, is clear violation of Article 131 of the Constitution, because the Deputy President is the principal assistant to the President, and therefore exercises powers of the President as per Article 131 of the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, if there is one charge, because we have 11 charges, that is going to send the Deputy President home, it's charge number 1. I listened to the evidence that was brought here by his counsel. That evidence of the coalition agreement of Kenya Kwanza was not sufficient, was not convincing. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, the Deputy President conveniently hid from...
Your time is up. Majority Leader, you may now move to reply.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to hereby reply, having listened to the contributions of my colleagues on this very important motion on trial by impeachment of the Deputy President, Honorable Rigathi Gachagua. I want to thank colleagues that have taken time to give their views, both in support and those opposing this motion, because that's how you grow a democracy, Mr. Speaker. We may not all have to agree on the same subject matter, Mr. Speaker, but the chance to even speak and say what you feel about an issue is an important attribute. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, I agree with the contribution that was made by one of the advocates for the Assembly, that comparing what you're doing today with previously what used to happen, where in the 1 o'clock news, vice presidents will be changed